As it turns out.
That's why I will try to.
Yeah, I'm gonna see if
They're right to
Yeah, I think
You
so
know,
too.
I don't know anyone more here in the US because my boyfriend is in government.
I don't know why you would come
Or like,
Detroit.
I know it's there, so maybe it's really cool. I don't know. Detroit.
that's why I want to
Or like interesting them, but I'm kidding.
Yeah, I put Thomas on like stuff.
know
Sorry,
it,
that
but
was
it's
obnoxious.
Chicago, but like,
Did I put William or did I put Bill? Because I know you.
like in
I
a
know you
word
put
list.
Bill.
having trouble narrowing down like
Totally.
types of specific roles. And I feel like we can have a real impact. Yeah. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, but
I think the good thing about summer internships is that
What does your ticket say, Bill?
It is. It's like literally
what
like
your day-to-day you're into.
like
keep your
the
info.
religious areas and then
Hopefully it's
kind of
not
stuff, and it's like a whole thing.
Let's go say have better things to do.
With that.
Well, if you
Probably
change it,
don't.
will you have to start over with miles? Do you collect
All right,
miles?
why don't we go ahead and get started? Thank you, each one of you for coming. My name is Jen Mason Beckford. I'm a fellow here at the law school, and I direct the Klau Center for Civil and Human Rights here on campus. And so on behalf of the Klau Center and on behalf of the Career Development Office, this is Public Interest Month, so welcome. Thanks for coming. The Klau Center has started a summer fellowship program for law students who want to spend summer working in a public interest organization that does civil or human rights or advocates for federal rights on behalf of underrepresented minorities. And the principal benefit of the fellowship program is, of course, to the fellows themselves. They get career experience and educational experience. It's great. But an additional benefit is that they come back to our law school community and they can share what they learned with the rest of us. And so I think it's an opportunity to learn about civil and human rights work substantively, and also to just think about what it means to be an advocate for human dignity more generally. And so this summer we had the great fortune to sponsor 3 fellows who are all really smart, energetic, committed people. And so we've asked them to come here today to share their experiences and their knowledge with us. Tom Dwyer worked at the Sargent Shriver Poverty Law Center. Bill Green worked at the Illinois Office of the State Appellate Defender, and Jessica Skochik worked at the Child Exploitation and Obscenity section in the U.S. Department of Justice. So we'll be accepting applications at the Klau Center for the next round of summer fellows this spring. You'll see notices about that. But in the meantime, we just really couldn't be prouder and more grateful of the great work that you guys did this summer and for spending your time with us here today. So please welcome our speakers.
To be clear, like you give them money. You gave them money to work.
Oh yeah, we give you money. Yeah, so it's a program in process. So this summer we did a combination of Klau Center funding with matching funds from the federal work study program and the law school in general. But we make it work for people. This is really important work, and we want to open the doors to you to spend your summer doing work that's going to advance your careers in civil and human rights. So thanks. Yeah.
It's money.
So as Professor McElward said, I worked at the Sargent Shriver Poverty Law Center, which has a really strange history, but it started basically after the demise of federally funded legal aid. The organization started, and the reason it lost its federal funding initially was because it became too much of an advocacy organization and merits of that decision aside, they decided it would function better as a nonprofit, which actually was sort of a new experience for me. Before law school, I worked for municipal government, so I'm kind of used to working in a place where everybody has a moral vision, but they feel sort of restricted by, in some ways, of like articulating that because of politics or just like the appropriateness of working in government and articulating that. So working at a nonprofit was a really good opportunity to do that. And relatedly, this summer I got to not only work in on big litigation cases, but I also got to participate in legislative advocacy, which is really nice. And in law school, it's sort of politics is sort of like in class becomes like a pejorative sometime, or you're thought of as like less intelligent if you like point out a policy problem with a legal rule, and people like smugly say, well, you know, that's Congress's decision, not the court. Where this summer you got to, when I saw an inequity, I could write in a memo that, you know, we should petition the legislature to change this, or maybe we don't have a path for litigation, but as an organization, we should advocate against this publicly, or, you know, through lobbying. So that was a really cool aspect of working at the Shriver Center this summer. A couple of things I wanted to mention, and I'm sorry if I say anything that sounds like really cynical, like career-wise, just know that like I may not be endorsing it. I might just be trying to sell the why you guys should do the fellowships. So don't judge me. Judge what I think of you guys. But the fellowships, like obviously it's great to be funded for the summer, to pay rent over the summer and to eat over the summer. But it like also provided a really huge added benefit that I might not have seen in when I was in your position last year, which is that it like let me punch above my weight in terms of prestige with an organization, because I applied to Sergeant Shriver through to work there through a funded internship they had, and I didn't get it, but but they offered me, they said you could come, we're still interested, you could come there, work unpaid. And because of the Klau Center funding, I was able to, I had taken that, and I was very nervous about securing funding, but because of the Klau Center, I was able to take that job that I wasn't qualified to get one of the paid positions for, not wasn't qualified, but wasn't chosen for one of the paid positions. So that's a huge added benefit of that. We're really lucky to have this funding available to us. And like I said, that's like pretty like cynical career-oriented way to think about it, but it is true. Another thing I wanted to talk about, my experience at Shriver, that I think I should know that distinguish it from like sort of how most people think of public interest. A lot of times public interest is thought of as people imagine you're doing direct representation. And I actually think that's career-wise what I want to end up doing. But I just wanted to point out that this summer I learned that's not really that's kind of a false dichotomy between public interest and firm work or whatever. If you don't want to appear in court very much in your career, if you don't want to be a organizer, recruiting clients or plaintiffs or whatever, there are a lot of public interest organizations where your day-to-day, quite frankly, is pretty similar to what it would be like at a big law firm. You're just not funneling money upwards. So that's something I might not have realized last year when I was applying for jobs. And like I said, I don't know if that's a feature to me, but it definitely wasn't a drawback. And if that's where you're at, where you want to do good in the world and forward a moral vision, but you don't necessarily want to do the type of work that comes with direct representation, there are like plenty of opportunities out there to do that. And Sergeant Shriver Center was a really good opportunity to do that. I guess this is sort of the same point, but I just think that day to day, you do a lot more interesting work and more substantive work when you're an intern at a organization that has outside funding, because usually there's a reason they have interns with outside funding is because they need the work done. And nobody this summer was inventing work for me to do. When I was given a memo assignment, whether it be for litigation or for like issue advocacy, it was because they really had a genuine question. It wasn't, we want to leave no stones unturned. So let's just throw this to an intern who we gotta give work to anyway. I felt like I was actually contributing. Whether when they read the memos, their questions were answered or not, you'd have to ask them. But I really felt like I was contributing in a more meaningful way, and I was doing more substantive work, and quite frankly, like work that most people would say second-year law students not qualified to do. Like I was given problems potential plaintiffs had, and I had to go try and find potential causes of action myself and stuff, and which is more fun and stimulating work. But I don't think it's work that you do in a non-public interest environment when there's people are paying a lot of money for expensive lawyer to do that. So I'm happy to answer any questions, or if there's anything more specific about I don't know if anybody wants to hear about like substantive things I did too, but yeah, okay. So I tried to have pull two examples. One, like litigation work I did. So Sergeant Shriver is pretty well known in the public interest law community for a big lawsuit that they've had, or a type of lawsuit that they've had in the past, and they currently have one against what are called crime-free housing ordinances, which those are local ordinances that create either mandatory evictions or permissible grounds for eviction if a certain amount of 911 calls are to a given house. And there are a lot of, they're quite frankly just unconstitutional for many reasons and bad policy for many reasons. Primarily the one advocate sees on is that if the tenant themselves is making the 911 call, that's still grounds for the landlord to evict, or sometimes mandatory grounds for the landlord to evict the tenant. So there's obviously a First Amendment petitioning the government problem with that, and a substantive due process problem with that. So I actually drove to Peoria, helped interview. I wasn't the only one there, but interviewed plaintiffs to gather facts, and did a lot of research on sort of the procedural jurisdictional issues about the case there. And on the advocacy side, this was way in the early stages. So again, I was getting to do a lot of groundwork that was beyond my my level of expertise probably, but Sergeant Shriver's healthcare team is trying to move into expanding dental coverage for poor children in Illinois, especially children with special needs. So I did a 50-state comparison of what states have done in their Medicaid programs to expand dental coverage for Medicaid recipients, and how they encourage dentists to treat people with special needs. And that's a really complicated problem because it's a supply side healthcare problem, and there are a finite amount of dentists, and dentists are actually, it's a really good time to be a dentist, and you can really choose your own clients well, and you don't have to accept Medicaid clients. So it's really hard to build an incentive structure for them to not only accept Medicaid patients, but accept children and accept special needs children. So I got to do a lot of creative thinking and suggesting ways that Illinois could leverage their Medicaid program to get more dentists to treat this, and changing Medicaid codes and who can perform some dental services, expanding it to dental hygienists, and there were a lot of different ways to attack it. And I got to really think about the problem and at a ground level, and not really tied to anything specific, which I don't think a lot of second-year law students get to do in their summer. So yeah, I can have.
Should I go and then we do questions after?
Yeah.
I'm Bill. I'm really glad Tom went first, actually. So you brought up a lot of really great points. And I think we both work for government. Mm-hmm. So the first of which is that when you work for a public interest agency, I think the most important thing that is broad-based around anywhere that you might work, whether it's government or nonprofit, is that they really need you. I worked for a nonprofit my first summer, and I worked for the state appellate defender, which is just the appellate level public defender for the state, right? And in both instances, even as a first year, I was trusted to interview clients. I was working for a housing nonprofit, interview clients, write memos, write orders, and do actual litigation work. And this summer, the state appellate defender at a high level is, like I said, the public defender for the state of Illinois at the appellate level. So they get any direct appeals for a convicted client. So if they came to us, they've already lost. So we are writing the briefs and making the arguments for them from the first initial appeal all the way up. And it was really, really interesting work. I got to write 7 appellate briefs this summer, which is like really unheard of. It's a lot more narrow in scope than Shriver Center, certainly. Shriver Center is an amazing organization that I actually worked a lot with before law school. But it's really narrow, but the workload is huge. So there's a ton of cases. I got to observe a number of oral arguments at the appellate level, got to go to the public defender's office and witness what the public defender does too in Cook County. And this is all in Chicago. But really the brief writing was the most interesting part, and that was the biggest substantive learning part for me. And why is that? Before this summer, I knew a couple of people that actually worked at OSAD, and talking about the work that they did at the appellate level. I'm not on moot court or anything. I knew I wanted to get more appellate experience just to see if that was something I was interested in. Of course, all the cases that you read in law school are appellate level cases. So I kind of want to see what the meat and potatoes of that was. And I was really floored with the experience. A lot of what I did was just investigating everything that had happened before, and it's kind of like figuring out a puzzle with the arguments that you might make. And yeah, we argued everything from actual innocence, police corruption or misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, which are all constitutional issues that go to due process in most cases. Ineffective assistance of counsel claims. One of my cases, the state argued and the guy got convicted for a 15-year increase on his sentence based on a prior conviction that the guy had for a similar charge. But the argument that the state made was that the prior conviction was for a guy with an entirely different name, like not even close to the same name. And in the police report, basically the state's argument was that you can, as long as we, the state, make an argument that we say that these two people are the same person, that you must presume, the court must presume that that is correct, no matter what the name is. And there's law that says, like, if it's a similar-ish name, so say like my last name is Green, say like the previous report had Green with an E at the end, my last name was Green like the color, like you can presume in some instances that that is the same person. This guy had an entirely different name. The defense attorney didn't realize that there's a fingerprint ID number that identified them as two entirely different people. So I got to make the argument that, and I was the first person that found that. So like I was looking at the police records. So not only did the defense attorney not find it, and it's like I had a lot of time. These people have a ton of cases. Like the public defender, like when we went to see them, they had so many. Like you're in like initial charging court, bail court, and you're seeing them roll through cases, and like these people don't get due process. It's just the nature of the beast. And you see that, so you realize that there might be issues that they might not have caught, right? So on appeal, it was really like eye-opening for me personally to see like the sheer scope of the number of people that are in the criminal justice system, which is another issue I'm passionate about, is like giving a specific case at a time. Like I was able to give a case at a time because they had the extra capacity, partly because of like the Klau Center funding allowed me to go and pursue another public interest job last summer. So it's huge, and it really helped with my writing. I realized I had externed for a fellow judge in Chicago in the spring. There, I realized I hadn't gotten any writing edits on my writing since like high school. And even like your first year writing classes, like you're getting some feedback, but like it's not like line by line edits. So a lot of the work that you can do, especially if you're going into litigation, is like go to a place that like they'll give you that direct feedback. I think I'm sure you guys both probably found that. Yeah. It's just like very, very, very good experience. And a lot of my friends that worked for firms didn't get that. They were writing research memos or redacting. And they really trusted us, and it was a really great experience. And how to make the argument. for me. And we can get into the weeds more, I guess, but.
We love the weeds. Okay, getting into the weeds of law, clarifying. Anyway, so like Bill said, I also worked in government. I was at the DOJ this summer as an unpaid volunteer intern, which I'll explain more about what that means as opposed to like being a slip intern, because it's a little bit different. You're all doing the same work, but you know, the funding is different, which is why the Klau Center is such a great thing to have behind you. So I kind of walked into the second semester of 2L thinking, oh, I can probably find a summer job. So as a 1L, I did my summer in Chicago with a nonprofit as well, focusing largely on immigration work and direct client legal services and the very sort of typical public interest placement. And then I ran into an alumni here who worked at the DOJ, and he's like, here's this website, here's all of these internships, just apply, like apply for everything. And I, lo and behold, got on this website, and there were probably 50 or 60 openings for summer interns that were volunteers at various offices in the DOJ. So if you're looking at going to the DOJ as a summer, it's completely attainable. And like Tom, I kind of thought I was punching above my weight until I started looking at it, and I was like, okay, like I'm really interested in these subject matter areas. And so for me, I applied to the child exploitation and obscenity section. I have background working with juvenile sex offenders before law school, so I came to law school with a very specific mission of studying and practicing international and domestic human and civil rights law. So my summer kind of falls into the ambit of enforcement of federal rights on behalf of underrepresented minorities, so in the case of children. So when I was a 2L, I sort of honed my interest in human rights to trafficking. So human trafficking, if you're interested in that, Professor Alexandra Levy teaches a course in human markets, usually in the spring, and it's excellent. So if you have any interest in trafficking or markets, in kind of how slavery from its ancient roots has developed into how we modernly conceive of human trafficking, it's a great class. So that was sort of my interest heading into applications for my 2L summer. So CIAS is very unique in the sense that it is a subject matter expertise unit. And if you're working at Main Justice, that's generally the scope of most of the offices there. So they'll all have their own sort of subject matter area that all of the attorneys in that office are experts in. And then they will partner with US attorneys and local offices and the FBI and nonprofit organizations and communities to assist them in bringing these cases against people who exploit children in the case of CIAS. So they primarily work in child pornography, which includes production, distribution, and possession. And they work in that sense with a high technology investigative unit, which does all the computer forensics for all these pornography cases, which is everything from tracking daily activity on the darknet, which we got to see as interns, kind of as part of a presentation and training, to doing computer forensic investigations and kind of seizing computers and hard drives and things and actually combing through those to look for images and evidence for these cases. They also deal in child sexual abuse on federal lands. So usually child sex abuse is prosecuted at the local and state level, but when you're on federal lands in a national park on Native American lands, that triggers the jurisdiction of the federal government. And so that is also dealt with by the section that I worked for. The extraterritorial sexual exploitation of children, which would involve a US citizen going abroad to exploit a child in another country in various ways. And so that's another area. They also do international parental kidnapping, which is something people don't really think about. They do obscenity cases as well, and then they do child sex trafficking. So that's the only aspect of trafficking that they do in that section. Another division in the DOJ does adult sex trafficking and child and adult labor trafficking. So that distinction is kind of important. Just honing it again on the fact that this group of 17 government lawyers are the national experts on this type of crime. So I worked on trafficking assignments over this summer. That's kind of was one of the conditions of my funding. So there's a lot of policy things going on with trafficking this summer. Are you guys familiar with FOSTA at all? So it's the Fighting Online Sex Trafficking Act, and it was signed into law by President Trump, not quite, President Trump in April of this year. And immediately there was a constitutional challenge, basically on freedom of speech grounds, that went to the DC Circuit, the DC District Court this summer. The judge heard it. He returned an opinion in September, actually like a week ago, granting a motion, the government's motion to dismiss. But the idea is that, in very general terms, that there previously internet service providers, so like Craigslist or Backpage.com, were immune from suit for any allegations of trafficking because they didn't provide the content. And so there was a huge number of trafficking victims, mostly minors, who were trying to sue Backpage in state courts. And they were saying, we need redress. We're victims here. This is, not the intention of the law that immunized these content hosts. And so with that sort of policy goal in mind, this law was passed. So it amended 3 sections of federal law and then added something to the criminal code. And so it was a very sort of shell-shocking moment for people who are interested in promoting sex workers' rights or making that space safer. Because what happened after the law was passed is that a huge amount of sex work was happening online, and then all of these sites shut down. So now that work is moving onto the street. And it's much more dangerous. And there are people in all sides of this debate talking about, we need this law because it's protecting children, it's making the internet safer. And then there's people who are opposed to it because it's saying, okay, well, it's making sex work less safe and it's infringing on free speech rights of organizations that promote and advocate for safety of sex work and legalization. And so it's a huge policy debate. So I got to dig into that debate as an intern working on, how do we speak about this law and articulate to state attorneys general and local prosecutors about how to use this law to correctly prosecute people who are actually trafficking others, and not to kind of go crazy and just use it to prosecute, consensual sexual encounters. So that was a big part of kind of what I did research on and got to contribute to creating training documents on how to educate and create hypothetical situations where state laws, basically any pimping statute at the state level, could be used now to go after these people who managed, owned, and operated pages like Backpage, which is where like 85 to 90% of child sex trafficking was happening in the United States. And so that was a big part, that policy research was a big part of what I did over the summer. I also, part of the internship was to kind of be part of trainings as well, which was very interesting. So we had the high-tech investigative unit do a training, like I mentioned, with us on the darknet and on sort of communities and like pedophile communities and things online and how they do their work. And then another training we had was on the emerging threats in this area. And so another trafficking threat that was identified is that children who are in the child welfare system, so foster kids, kids in group homes, kids who end up in the system through either abuse or neglect, and they're removed from their homes or are homeless, what are controversially, in my opinion, called throwaway children, are often swept up in trafficking. And so in 2013, the FBI reported that more than 60% of US children recovered from sex trafficking incidents that year had previously been in the foster care system. And so what they're trying to do at CEOS is partner with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and local organizations to try to figure out what is happening, why are these kids being so particularly victimized, and how can we improve protections? And so I worked on that issue as well this summer, just trying to figure out kind of, is this a problem? How widespread is it? Where are the gaps in the pipeline kind of, and how can we improve it through partnership and potentially more government oversight, which you can have opinions about that one way or the other. So The other things I worked on this summer were sentencing issues. So this federal sentencing guidelines, in the words of my supervising attorneys, are a mess. But, you know, they're trying to get people who have really, really harmed kids locked up so they can't harm more kids. I can go into very brief details about one of the cases I worked on, but it is not pleasant material, so I can hold back on that unless you guys want to hear about it. But suffice it to say that it was a guy who had very seriously hurt 3 kids that were in his care, ages 1 to 12. So I did a supplemental sentencing memo that actually got incorporated verbatim into a filing that went to the court that ended up helping this guy get sentenced appropriately for what he had done. So that was very cool. And then at the investigation level of a different case, I mentioned that federal jurisdiction on Native American lands makes these cases fall into the ambit of the DOJ. We were in the middle of an investigation, and so myself and 2 other interns worked on a project together on this one fact pattern. And these, you know, the binder with like the case filings and all the evidence that we had was like one of those 5-inch binders, and you're like, okay, I need 14 days to read through these materials. But it contained images, therapy notes, stuff that's more heavy. So we spent all this time kind of going through this evidence, and my 2 co-interns had issues dealing with admissibility of evidence, so statements outside of court that were made, as well as jurisdiction, which was sort of, did this crime that we've identified occur on Native American lands or not? And so that was another question. And I worked on sufficiency of the evidence to show intent to commit abusive sexual contact or aggravated sexual abuse of a child. And so that, again, was very much combing through kind of what did this guy do? What were the exact actions? What motivated him to do it? Can we prove it in court? And so that was another very cool kind of different level. So the sentencing memo was obviously at the end of a case, and then this was very much at the beginning of the investigation. And part of that work was getting to sort of sit in on a conference call with the FBI agent in the jurisdiction to talk about next steps and things like that. And so that was another big project I worked on. Other really great features of just a summer at the DOJ generally, they do department-wide kind of events for interns. So like brown bag lunches, you can go listen to other attorneys talk about what, some big case. I think we had a campaign finance fraud case that we got to hear all about, and the other sections will come in and talk to you about whatever they're working on or what they're doing. They do Supreme Court tours, they do main justice building tours, which is kind of like an art tour. So if you're into that, that was cool. And then within the section, like I mentioned, they did section training. So very specific to what the unit was doing currently at that time. And then they do a mentorship program as well in CIAS, where you have a trial attorney mentor who you work one-on-one with on kind of your longer summer project, which at CIAS is updating their case digest. So you review, I think for us, it was 40 cases each, recent child exploitation cases, and try to identify any new insights or, different holdings that have changed precedent, and cases all over the country at the federal level. So again, you're very much diving into some pretty tough fact patterns. And then we had mentors at the management level too. And so my mentor was the deputy chief of policy and legislation. And it was interesting working with her because she actually had a hand in kind of the government side of the FOSTA legislation that I mentioned at the beginning. So getting to go and listen to oral argument at the DC District Court about kind of the constitutional challenge to this and what the arguments looked like and how the government was going to respond was pretty interesting. The judge was actually very upset. It was hilarious, but yeah, so that was another very cool part of the internship, was getting to kind of get to know these attorneys really well. And kind of like these guys said, you're getting work that's really substantive and you're making a contribution, kind of even at the level where your role as an intern is largely research and writing. You're really doing work that matters. And like I said, a lot of my co-interns and myself had work that was directly, implemented or directly incorporated into what was being submitted to the court. And so that was a really cool feature as well. So I have a really I have a long love affair with public interest work, so I can answer questions like these guys can too. So thank you for coming, and I hope you hold on in the midst of sort of the frenzy that will occur for U1Ls next summer with firm hiring. You kind of hold on to this passion and you stay the course, because it's a really rewarding way to use your life.
I wanted to mention that too. Like, I don't know if it's mostly 2Ls or 1Ls in here, but for 2Ls, like, like I was really anxious at this time last year about everything, because all my friends who were going to firms had jobs, and they were all measuring prestige with some rankings I had never even heard of. And it's like, it's two things: public interest places just hire later. It's just like a fact of life. So don't worry about not having a job. I didn't get my job until I think it was after we came back to school.
Yeah.
So it was January.
Mine was February.
February.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and like, even like the prestige stuff just doesn't, like, nobody cares. Everybody, like, after OCI, I think everybody cares for 2 weeks, but then everybody forgets. And yeah.
Well, and also the other thing I was the first Notre Dame intern they had at this section. Like, they had never hired a Notre Dame student before, not because, I think it's because they just didn't apply, because people don't know. So they're looking for people. And actually, if you're interested in doing a summer in DC or a semester in DC, because I think the law school is still doing that program.
Springtime, yep.
Semester at DC in the spring. I'm sure they'll hire 1Ls. One of my co-interns was like he had just finished 1L. But if you're interested in going to DC, not maybe working in child sexual exploitation, but any of the divisions, they all hire volunteer interns during the semester too. So if you want to up and go to DC and try your hand at that. It's also a really good resume builder if you want to apply for DOJ honors, like if the federal government is kind of your end goal. Having that on your resume and having contacts and the ability to network in the city is just completely, it's huge.
It's huge.
Probably the biggest benefit of being there.
What was the website that you referred to earlier in there?
You can email me.
Yeah.
We don't hide it, like, we widely publicize it. But,
Yeah. It's like, just type in like DOJ legal internships.
the volunteer, Googling the volunteer word is really important to include, because because the slip opportunities have, well, 1Ls can't even apply for that, but yeah, you Google DOJ volunteer law clerk.
Yeah.
She's right. Like, there's tons of them.
Yeah, and I had no idea it existed. I was just like, I was shocked at how many opportunities, and I applied late. I think I was their last hire for my summer. And again, I have experience in the area and I care about it a lot. And so I was able to kind of say, here's my experience. Here's a compelling story about a kid that I helped before who had committed a sex offense. And like, here's all these, so think about what your story's going to be, because that will sell you. This woman read my cover letter. I think I submitted my application on January 1st, phone interviewed on the 7th, and had the job on the 8th. So I'm not recommending that, but be direct about what you want and what your experience is and why you want to work there. And I know you've probably heard this 1,000 times from CDO, and write a good cover letter. And how do I write a good cover letter? All of us have good experience doing that. So if you have questions, just
Yeah. Can I just say one more thing, kind of about like the split between summer and in-semester externships? So like, one other thing to like keep in mind about in-semester externships, I did Chicago last spring, and it was excellent. A lot of places that so I worked for a federal judge, and the summer before, I think 8 of our classmates worked for the same judge, and their experiences were really mixed. And I know my experience, and you to DC, right?
Just for summer.
Okay.
Yeah.
But my experience is shared among other people. Like, if you go first in the semester, you will probably be one of a few, if not the only one, that works for any given area. And so like, when I was basically an extra clerk, like, I should not have been given the things that I was given, and it was truly awesome. And that's just not for a judge. Like, that applies to nonprofits and government too. And talking about like hitting above your weight, like, a lot of the summer places are super competitive. Is for some of the more, we were talking about prestige, but like some of the prestigious things. But you have the ability to go and do that. I know one of my friends clerked on the DC circuit, or as an extern last spring. And that is something that he acknowledged he probably wouldn't have been able to get if he did it for the summer. And then you can leverage that later, like Jess was saying. And I think getting as much, and what everyone has told me about, back to the cover letter, like passion will bleed through in your cover letter if you just put it in there. Like, I want this is why, please hire me, I want this job super bad. Like,
Basically,
talk to
that's right.
Caitlin about the details of those words.
Super bad is a word I always recommend, and
Yeah.
it's one word though, it's not two.
But yeah, and you'll get amazing experience. I mean, for one thing I forgot to mention, we did weekly trainings, kind of like what you were talking about, where they would bring in attorneys. A lot of them used to be appellate defenders with OSAD that had gone on to different things, talking about various policy initiatives. One of the things, at least in our work, that was interesting to see is like the common themes, and like we can't, like, unlike the Shriver Center as a government agency, and Tom and I kind of flipped. Like, I worked for a nonprofit for years before, and then went to work for this government agency, and you can't advocate for legislative fixes, but you can constantly put it in your briefs, and like you can fight for these things in your oral advocacy. Like, you're kind of just battling it out with the state's attorney at that place constantly and losing a lot. Like the case that I mentioned, I will probably lose that case. I lost every other. There are two outstanding. It's that one and this other opening brief that I wrote. But you can continue fighting for it. The law is long in that regard. Anyways, so you had a question?
Yes, it was more about specific nonprofits. I feel like there's thousands of nonprofits. So how do you know when you apply to one you're going to get good experience?
I think the interview.
and I think that's a good. I mean, a lot of their work's public, so you can read about cases they bring beforehand, which is good to prepare for the interview, and it's good to know if it's the kind of work you would want to do. And then I think you could use that and then make assessments about the size of the organization and how much work you're going to get. But even like big places, I think in nonprofit, they all have substantive work. I mean, we have a classmate who worked at the Southern Poverty Law Center, and he was doing a lot of substantive work. So I think it's just a general rule that you're going to get really good work at a nonprofit. So you should just, I think you should find one that aligns ideologically and then work from there.
Yeah, and I would also say like more established ones. So look at when they were incorporated. Like if they've been around for a bit and they've taken interns for a while, they'll likely have more of an established program. So my first summer, the nonprofit was there for a while, but they were kind of in flux, and that's something that you can't know. Like literally the week before I left, like 3 of their attorneys left and they had 9. So like they were getting a new executive director. One other thing I would recommend is to like, there's some type of Excel sheet that has every law student here, where they worked their summers and beyond. I would reach out to people. I'm sure most of you are 1Ls, right? I'm sure that everyone has told you to like ask someone that's either a student or like an alum, and they'll like respond to you. I found that to be almost entirely true. So I would like talk to somebody that worked there.
SBA career contact list.
That's it.
If you want to have a specific thing to plug in your email to track that down.
Yeah, that's on the website, I think.
I'm sure it's somewhere on our, that too. I always search for it in email though, because I find the Gmail's fastest.
Yeah, just kind of to Bill's point too, I worked at a very small, young, brand new nonprofit my 1L summer. And it was kind of like this frenetic energy there. Like kind of the interns were like, what are we really supposed to do? We're not really sure. So we would just I must have done like 20 DACA renewal applications for undocumented children who were, you guys are familiar with DACA? Okay, so cool, I'll have to explain that. But that's what I spent a lot of my time doing, and then doing direct legal services in a clinic. The unique thing about my nonprofit in the summer was that they were a community activism and law alliance is what they were called. So they did local activism in Chicago, which was part of our summer, was to kind of create an advocacy project and then go do it, which for us was a Know Your Rights presentation for youth in Back of the Yards, which is sort of a minority underrepresented community in Chicago. And then on top of that, we did, briefs and direct client services and kind of foreign immigration law. We did naturalization applications, we did power of attorney, we did kind of all kinds of stuff, but it was very focused on the needs of the community. So it just kind of depends. I would highly recommend asking those questions if you get to, like, when you get to an interview, be like, what will I be doing this summer? And if they publish on their website who past interns were, then I would like reach out to those people too. I mean, it'd be like, hey, I'm at Notre Dame, I want to work at this organization you were at. Can you tell me what it was like for you? And I think, I don't know if they still do this, but direct legal service organizations will qualify you for funding from Equal Justice America, if they're still doing that. Mm-hmm. So that was something that helped me fund my 1L summer too, is that Caitlin reached out to me and was like, apply for this money. They want to give you money. And I was like, okay. And this was after I'd already been at my placement for like a week. And then like the next day I had $2,000. So
very specific, though. They want people that are specifically helping the poor in a direct representation capacity. Yeah. So if you're working for the DOJ, like wouldn't qualify. Yeah. But
last year.
Yeah, and not a lot of students do that. So anyone who is doing that can almost definitely get EJA, Equal Justice America funding.
Yeah.
Very specific mission though.
The externship that you mentioned in Chicago, were you there full time, or were you like 2 days in Chicago, 3 days in South Bend?
So I was there full time.
Okay.
It was part of the Chicago program. So the externship is 8 credits, and then there's an externship class that meets once a week. The 8 credits, you have to work 32 hours a week to get the academic credit. Because I loved it, so I was like working a ton. I was writing a ton, so a lot of that was just like I would be in court, but I didn't have an office, so I'd like go home. I'm like standing in my tiny apartment, like at a table. Yeah, so there was that, and then the program is equipped with like remote classrooms. So there's a couple classes that are offered remote from South Bend. So I took one of those and I did a directed reading. Which is kind of like a long, like in the form I did, it was a long form research paper on a topic that I was interested in. But I think we just got an email that's only going to be offered in the spring in the future, which is great because then you can't miss football.
You're gonna miss it anyway. Football happens on Saturdays.
That's right. But yeah, and I did know a couple of people in our class came back on Fridays for class.
Yeah.
But because it's close, and there's a metro train, there's a metro commuter train, the South Shore. South Shore. Yeah.
Each one of you has done different substantive kinds of work in your different summers or in your externship. And so it is true that it's great to have passion as a 1L, but I don't know that you need to have honed in on exactly what you need to do. So can you talk about the virtues of trying different substantive areas and different types of work, and how, having done that, how you feel like you're set up to kind of pursue your job after graduation?
I want to preface this by saying, like, I don't harbor any ill will. I had a good summer. I really like Shriver. I think it's a good organization, but I did learn that I think what I want to do more is direct advocacy than the kind of work I did this summer, or direct representation. I think that's a more natural approach to litigation. I think it makes it easier, and I wouldn't have known that unless I had done, because my 1L summer I worked for Arch City Defenders, and which is in direct representation nonprofit in St. Louis that does high impact litigation too, but it really comes from people they had directly represented in criminal proceedings or in fines and fees cases before. So those are two different approaches, and I don't think one is like inherently better than the other, but I unless I had done both, I don't think I would have come away from that. So I'm really, and I don't know if there would be a point in my career where I'd learn that later with more consequences than this summer. So I'm glad I did two different types of places.
Yeah, I would agree. I came into law school with a general sense of what I want to do. I knew I wanted to do public interest work. And I had worked on healthcare before, but that route's really weird in the nonprofit space. Like, so I knew I wanted to do something else. I went to this housing nonprofit, and they do a mix of advocacy and direct client services. Like I would say it's like a 50-50 split, but the attorneys there are all direct client services, which is great. I got to interview clients. I really like that. I really like working with the clients. But I figured out that I didn't want to do housing law for two reasons. Like, housing court is insanity, and it's not based in the law hardly at all. I didn't want to deal with bankers all day. So that was my realization. And then I also knew, so that was a try and fail, right? In terms of like what I wanted to do. So then I knew I wanted to get more litigation experience. So that was part of my reason why I wanted to go to Chicago and work in federal court, which was fantastic. In terms of seeing I remember you guys are all taking Civ Pro right now. I remember sitting in civil procedure, being terrified, not knowing what's going on. I don't know like anything about court, no idea how things work. All these rules are flying around, no clue. So, huh? Oh, I had Judge Barrett,
Okay.
and I
wow.
sat in that chair, and she never roasted me. Success. But when I went to federal district court, it was kind of like incredible to see all these different types of law, the approaches to those various types of law, and really sitting with my judge and the clerks who were brilliant, and getting to pick their brains about the law and approaches to it, and seeing all those various types of law. I had no idea. I was good at crim, but I had no interest in doing criminal law before law school. But seeing the stakes of that made me much more interested in seeing what it is. So I was like, okay, like, not sure I want to go to the prosecutor's office because I know too many cops. And but so I was like, one of my supervisors from the housing nonprofit coincidentally runs the internship program at OSET. So I met with him, and I was like, hey, like, do you hire interns, whatever? And he's like, yes. Would you want to work here? Yes. Great. And it was a really great experience. Now, what that turns into when you're doing interviews for various places, the main question is like, okay, you did all these things. How does that make you good at X? And that answer is going to be different for everybody. I think there are elements of any type of law that you could use to answer that question. Part of it goes, and even at a certain point, like, you might not know exactly what you want to do after law school, but you might know you want to be in a certain area. And using your prior experiences, kind of crafting your own personal story to tell them, like, I did these things, it made me interested in this area of the law, even if it's not specific. I have these skills now that I've been working on that would make me a good person to do Y. And that kind of comes down to you. But you don't have to have, not everybody comes into law school and is like, you know what, I want to do real estate transactions. I know I want to do it, and I want to go straight through doing that. That's like more of the exception, and people know that. Like, you know. So.
Yeah. So I had experience prior to law school too, working, like I mentioned, in treatment with juvenile sex offenders. And I had studied criminology and sociology in undergrad and had focused very specifically on sexual and domestic violence. This is like a common theme in my life. But I will say that my first summer, I decided not to do something in that space, even though I had opportunities to, because I wanted to not be sort of pigeonholed into like, okay, this is a sexual domestic violence girl and she can't do anything else. So there is some value to diversifying and kind of stepping into a space you're unfamiliar in, I think, unfamiliar with. And so I kind of got this great experience doing immigration law, realized how important it is to have Spanish as a second language, which I do not. So if you're interested in that and you don't have a language in your free time, think about that.
All your free time.
All your free time, study another language. But it was really beneficial for me because I mean, in all the work that I had done prior to law school was direct human services in some way or another. So before I was in social work, I taught. And so I was like very familiar with speaking with parents and kids and social workers and therapists. And so I was very comfortable in that direct services space. And so my first summer, I was back in that space, but doing something totally different substantively. And that was very cool. Realizing also that after my first summer, because I was in a direct services space, I didn't get any writing experience. And so when I showed up at the DOJ, like a budding 3L, I was like, I haven't written a legal memo since my 1L. What are words? And so getting the opportunity in a very research and writing based internship, which is how it was sold to me, was a great opportunity to hone those skills. Because the other thing, like what Bill said, is when you're thinking about applying to stuff, you got to think about what's my value added, and for a prosecutor's office, for example, like a local DA's office, I mean, that direct legal services, like comfort with a fast pace, those are skills that, you can teach, but also like are great to come in with as well. And the research and writing experience is kind of why you're here in a sense. So for me, it was really important to diversify not only the subject matter that I was in, but then also to kind of get both direct legal services and research and writing while I was in law school, so that when I was sending applications out as a 3L, I could be like, I have all these things, here's the full package. And I did go back into, sort of the sexual abuse space as an advocate as well. But I mean, it's just kind of trying everything on until you find what fits. And it's okay to do completely different things. I mean, I grew up in St. Louis, went to undergrad in Pennsylvania, did my 1L summer in Chicago, 2L summer in DC, and will probably be moving to New York after graduation. So while there is a huge amount of weight to building your brand in a market, if you want to be there, you won't be precluded from going somewhere new if you kind of spend your summers just sort of hopping around and just chasing opportunities rather than geographic locations.
I would like to add to my answer to Professor McAvoy's question about substance. In terms of like area of law, I think sometimes public interest, people get take this for what it worth. It's just somebody who spent 2 summers doing it, but public interest, people get siloed, and that's actually like kind of harmful to the practice, because I think a really good public interest lawyer is going to be a true generalist, because it's like lawyering in the purest sense, where someone comes to you with a problem and you have to figure out how the law can help solve that problem. And that may be a tort suit. It may be a contract issue. You may have to make a constitutional claim, and you're going to have to get into court and understand jurisdictional issues. So I just think the most important thing you can do with like substance is just take the classes that challenge you the most and you think are the hardest and make you think the most, because you're going to have to think in 100 different ways every day anyway. So
yeah, and the good news, that's great advice. People will talk about really hard classes and you shouldn't take them, but like you should take them. And then the other thing that I was probably told this, but was not acutely aware of, is that so we're 3Ls, right? There are a ton of skills classes in the law school if you want to take them in various forms. So don't stress out if you're not finding in your first and even your second summer that you're getting certain skill sets, because there are in the region externships that you can take to supplement. There are skills courses here that are great. And if you need those skills for whatever reason, you can probably learn them. And there's no better place to learn than now. Once you get into practice, there's not going to be a lot of time to learn. And that's what I've been told, at least. Maybe there is, probably not though.
I think at the end of the day, I hope one of the takeaways from this is that there are lots of resources to support you if you want to do public interest work for a law degree or during your time in law school. There are some financial resources, but I think even more important than that, you have amazing peers who can give you great guidance.
And there are faculty members like me who did public interest work before I came to teach.
Or who have contacts in the public interest world. And then there's Caitlin, the career development office, who really
every time I go to her, she has the answer. And so there's just a lot of support for you. And I think that it's really easy, as Tom alluded to get on to the conveyor belt that kind of takes you toward the inexorable and being a law firm. But if you have the courage to just step off a little bit, I think that kind of a whole new realm of opportunity will be available to you. And so please know that, you know, the law school is here to support you. The Klau Center is here to support you. I'm here to support you. And so thank you to these guys. It's been terrific. Thank you.
Public interest month, hashtag get off the conveyor belt.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for speaking, guys.
Thanks.
Tom, you should call me sometime.